So there is some content from the first video that I put out earlier this week. I'll back up a little bit. This concerns JavaScript output. And I go through about 5 or 6 ways to output whatever you're writing in JavaScript onto HTML. And this is kind of important for you. This is the key linkage with JavaScript and HTML. So please make sure you go back and look at those. Okay, so thinking about JavaScript, let's break it down to the basics here. JavaScript programs are a type of computer program, and we are going to take a 10,000 foot view of some of this. Some of it may not make sense to you, so I encourage you to kind of stop, pause, ask questions, say, Mr. Rogers, I don't understand what you mean here. Can you talk about it further? It's very important. So JavaScript programs, as far as you guys are concerned, these programs will run in the browser. Now there are other servers that allow you to run a JavaScript program. The Node.js server is one example of that. But concerning web development, you're dependent on how well the browser interprets your code, okay? So keeping that in mind, a JavaScript program is considered a type of computer program. A computer program is a list of instructions that are executed by the computer. So in our case, it's the browser. Okay, the browser executes the instructions. In a programming language, these programming executions, they're called statements. All right? And what we're going to be looking at primarily today are different types of statements that you can write in your code and execute. All right, so a JavaScript program is a list of statements, right? So consider the following list of statements. Var x, comma, y, comma, z. X equals 5. Y equals 6. Z equals x plus y. Now I want you to think about what you see happening there. What is occurring? What do you guys think? Silence. You guys think, right? I'll give you a hint. Var is the keyword that declares a variable. So look at the first 3 letters there. We're saying var these 3 letters. And that means that we're declaring x, y, and z as variables. Okay? X equals 5, y equals 6, and z equals x plus y. So what does z equal? Basic. Yeah, it equals 6 plus 5. But so the sum of that would be obviously 11, right? Very basic list of instructions, of statements. So we've fed the computer the variables, we've assigned the variables, and we've ran a simple piece of code. Now, when you're looking at what's happening there, it's very important to think about program instruction going from top down. Okay, program instruction goes from top down. And just like in HTML or CSS, everything goes from the top down. You wouldn't put this z equals x plus y up above the var. The computer wouldn't know how to handle it. It would just tell you, I don't know what you're telling me. It doesn't make sense. All right, so let's dig deeper into these statements. Last lecture, I listed all of these output statements. Okay, and again, I want to emphasize, y'all need to go back and watch that video. There's a lot of output statements that you could use to take your JavaScript and change the HTML. Okay, so consider the code below. What does every line below have in common? Look very closely. Every line of this code has something in common. What do all of these pieces of code have in common? They're being defined up here, but every line has a piece of code that's in common. In fact, it's a character that's in common. It's a very important character. Well, there's equals on these three, yeah, but not up here. What is the one character that's in common on all of those? Exactly, the semicolon. They all have semicolons. Now, semicolons, these separate JavaScript statements. This is something you'll need to kind of always remember. If you took the Java class I taught last year, Java is just like this. All statements are ended with semicolons. Okay? Your JavaScript, it's going to ignore multiple spaces. But in general, you want to add white space for readability. Now, I mentioned this in the class that there are certain minifiers, right? If you remember for a couple of weeks ago, there are certain minifiers. And what they do is they go through and they minify all the white space out of your code. And they change variable names down to very basic single letters, right? For readability, when you're writing your code, you want to make your code as easy to read as you can. You can worry about compressors later, things that minify. So in this code, both of these lines of code are equivalent, even though this one doesn't have any white space. Best practice, always put spaces around your operators. Put spaces between them. So here's an operator, right? Here's an operator. For readability, always put your spaces. Okay. All right, let's consider code blocks. Code blocks, this is another important element. These are always defined by the curly brackets. So if you're looking at the following function block down here, you'll see in this code block there's a curly bracket and a curly bracket. All code blocks will be made up of curly brackets. Okay? In this instance, the most general basic use of a code block that you could have is a function, because functions are code blocks that are pieces of code that can be called, right? They're all kind of wrapped up in curly brackets. So we've talked about semicolons. They identify the ends of lines. We've talked about the importance of spaces for your operators. And now we've talked about code blocks. Okay? Let's consider some JavaScript keywords. Now this is just a small set. There are more. But the following set of keywords are important. There's the break. The break keyword, it terminates inside of a switch or a loop. And unfortunately today, we're not going to be getting into looping. I'll try to deal with loops a little bit next week. The continue. The continue jumps out of a loop and starts back to the beginning. Debugger. It stops the execution of JavaScript and calls, if available, a debugging function. The do while, this executes a block of statements and repeats that block with a condition of true. Then you have the for loop. This marks a block of statements to be executed as long as the condition is true. You have the function keyword. This function keyword declares a function. We're going to talk about this one more today as well. You have the if-else. If-else marks a conditional block of code. Okay? These are executed based on conditions. Return, which returns from a function, or switch, which is kind of like a an if-else block, right? But it's a little bit different. A try-catch. Try-catches are a way to wrap your code block, and if there's an error that occurs inside the try part, it'll be thrown automatically down to the catch. Okay? And then the keyword var. And the two biggest keywords that the three biggest keywords we're going to focus on today are the var, the return, and the function. Okay? Var, return, and function. Now we'll also look at an if condition later on in our homework assignment. But for us today, var, return, and function. These are the three keywords I want you to pay attention to. All right, let's talk about variables. Variables, they come in different types, primarily two types. They come as fixed values. We call these literals, and variables. If I tell you that you have a variable interest rate, what does that mean? Versus a fixed interest rate. Who was speaking? I couldn't tell who was talking there. I apologize. What do you think? So fixed means it doesn't change, right? Variable means it can change. And that's really the big thing you want to take into account here. Your variables can change. Your fixed variables do not change. All right. So your JavaScript literals are things like actual data that you type. And there's two primary examples. You have numbers and you have strings. So a number can be 12.3 or 1234. Another type of literal can be a string. And Omar may notice here, sorry Omar, I'm picking on you again since you're in my Java class. You'll notice that string here is in lowercase. And there's only one type of number in JavaScript. There's not a float, there's not a double, there's not a long or an int or any of that. There's just one type of number in JavaScript. So JavaScript variables, they are used to hold literals, variables that you are passing to it, right? So variables, these store data. And if we're really going to talk about the data, when we say var this object, we're actually telling the computer to go grab up a piece of real estate of RAM in your computer's hardware and set it aside for that variable. That's literally what it's doing. It's going out and grabbing a piece of hardware, memory space in your hardware, okay? So variables, they store data. The var keyword is used to declare. So we're going to look at the syntax of this in a moment, but there's a couple of things that are used for this. There's the var, then there's the identifier, and there's the equal sign. So I have var, identifier, and the equal sign that's used to assign the value, usually the literal. All right. I want you to be careful though. The equal sign is different than a double equals or a triple equals. We're going to look at these later. These are for comparison. You have your operators, again, used to compute values in expressions like 6 times 8. In programming, you don't use the x for multiplication. You'll use the asterisk. Okay, that's pretty important. You can also use expressions like this, the x variable times 8. Remember that the asterisk is always the multiplier symbol, not the x. The other thing I want you to remember here is when you're looking at your assignment operators, think of my dear Aunt Sally. Please. Right? Please remember my dear Aunt Sally. Do you remember that from elementary school? You're looking at the order of precedence for your operators. It still applies in programming. When you apply the order of precedence, it will basically determine how your code is written. Now, for those of you who are someday looking to go on to become math majors, the basics that you're learning in this class, as well if you go on and take a computer programming class, you can use to go on and do advanced calculus or advanced mathematics with the programming languages. Because now the computer, you can give it your mathematical problem, and it will automatically go through it and calculate it for you, right? This is very useful. All right. So the other thing I have down here at the bottom is I have, let's see, let me pull my cursor off of it again. I have the plus symbol using to concatenate text. So you see here it says Mike in quotes plus quotes, quotes with a space in between plus quotes Rogers, close quote. That will evaluate to the text that you see on the far right there. Okay. Comments. Comments are very much the same. You use the double line comment for commenting out a single line, or multiple lines. You'll use the backslash, asterisk, and then you could skip down several spaces in your code and put your closing comment. Okay. All right, variable names. This is important. Variables are called identifiers, and identifiers are called variables. So you use these to name your variables. So you'll have var, whatever the identifier is. The rules for legal names are very similar to other programming languages with some exceptions. Okay. For example, the first character of an identifier in JavaScript can be a letter, it can be an underscore, or a dollar sign. A letter, an underscore, or a dollar sign. Subsequent letters can be letters, digits, underscores, and dollar signs. You cannot begin an identifier with a number. You can't begin it with 6, whatever the rest of your text is. Okay, it has to begin with either a letter, an underscore, or a dollar sign. And variable names, they're case sensitive. So, for example, you'll see here in my screenshot, this lecture, it says first name, and you'll see it's in camel case, right? This variable and this variable are not the same. So if you try to access first name thinking it's going to be this one over here, it won't. They're not the same. They're different variables in JavaScript. This means that the way you type it is very important. It's case sensitive. Another thing to remember, all caps var and uppercase first letter var are not understood to be var, lowercase. If you're going to declare a variable, it has to be all lowercase var. If you try to do it by any of these, your code is not going to work. In fact, it'll produce some strange values. Hyphens, cannot use hyphens in your JavaScript identifiers. You'll notice that in HTML and CSS that we use hyphens in between our IDs, right? We'll have the name and ID hyphen, the other part of it. That's very common. But in JavaScript, you cannot use hyphens. It's against the law. The JavaScript police will come and get you. They really will. That was a joke. Making sure you guys are paying attention. Not playing Minecraft or something else over there. All right. Camel case, underscores. Those are the best practices for variable names. Now there's 3 ways to create a variable. There's var, there's let, and there's const. Var, let, and const. If you use const, it is a variable that cannot be reassigned. So for example, something that you know is universal, like pi, 3.14, yada, 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 right? You could declare a variable and say const pi equals 3.14. That's something that cannot change. Now that you've declared the variable with a const keyword, that variable, you won't be able to change it. It's considered a constant. The let is similar to a constant, but it's restricted by the scope. So if you declare a variable inside of a code block, inside the curly brackets, that variable that you use let is restricted to that scope. It will not change for that scope. But the next time that code block is called again, you can reassign it. And the most common, of course, is var. Var is a variable, right? It's means that you can change it, right? Okay, any questions so far? No, cannot. You'd have to, if you have a var, a let, and a constant on the same line, I'm pretty sure it'll throw an error. Okay, so variables and values. So computer programs, they often have variables. It's a given. You're going to have a variable, and they hold the values. But when they're empty, they have a special placeholder value. You can tell them that they're special. For example, if you look at the code that I have here, I have var. It's going to give me a special value, and this value is called undefined. In JavaScript, a non-value is undefined. This is very similar to Java and C++. They have the concept of null. But null in JavaScript is a type of it's considered an object, but it has the same value as undefined. Whereas a variable that you don't declare a value to is just undefined. And we're going to talk more about types later. I don't want you to get confused with this because it can get very confusing. If you think about types, right? Like types of computers, types of objects, types of bicycles. There's types of data types, right? Numbers, strings, those are all different types. Let's move on. I don't want to confuse you yet. So I can reassign the value later though. And this is the other important thing about JavaScript variables. If they're variable, I can say var bicycle, semicolon, and then down a few lines, I can say bicycle equals Schwinn to assign it a value. And then later on down, I could reassign it again, and I could say bicycle type equals Trek, right? I can make it anything I want. If it's a let, though, if I say let bicycle name, and I'm in that same code block, I can't reassign it because it's scoped. Okay, does that make sense? All right, let's keep going. JavaScript arithmetic operators. Now, the one in here, the asterisk asterisk, this is when you're using exponents like to the second power or whatever. You have plus for addition, minus for subtraction, one asterisk for multiplication, double for exponents, a backslash for division, and the percent sign for the modulus. This is the remainder. So if you do, some strange division and it's going to give you a decimal point, but you only want the remainder instead of the decimal value, you can do that. It'll give you the remainder value. Or you could say plus plus to increment or minus minus to decrement. And these two we're not going to really get into today. In fact, we won't be dealing with exponents or modulus or any of this down here today. But you need to kind of keep them aware. All right. So operator assignments. So the equal sign, here's an example, x equals y. And this is the same as y equals x, right? If I use the operator plus equals, this is x plus equals y. This is the same as saying x equals x plus y. All right? Or minus equals. Minus equals x minus equals y is the same as saying x equals x minus y. Right, you guys get the idea. These are very shorthand. These are shorthand operators to make writing your code more succinct. Okay. All right. So let's look at the JavaScript string operator. Here I'm declaring a variable called text, and my name of this variable is text1, right? and I say it equals what an interesting space, close quote, excuse me, semicolon. On the next line, I say text 1 plus equal day. So think about what that means. What is another way of saying that? Yeah, what an interesting day, right? So I'm taking this text here and I'm saying equals text 1 plus day. And you'll notice here that this is called a left assignment. I'm assigning the literal what an interesting to the left, to the variable text 1. This is very important for all programming languages, left assignment. Anytime you have a single equal sign, you're assigning the value. If you see a double equal sign, that's for comparison. It's different. But a single equal sign is for assignment. All right. So you can concatenate strings and numbers together as well. You could say var x plus, let's see, var x equals 5 plus days of the week, which would be equivalent string of saying 5 days to the week. So you can add a number to text. Anytime that you use a number though plus something in a quote, you've now converted that number to a string. That's important to remember. All right. So your comparison operators, I mentioned these a minute ago. You have the equal to. This means that you're going to compare two objects. Is A and B, are they the same? That's where you'd say A equal B. And this would evaluate to a Boolean. A Boolean is a true or false. Okay. Equal value and equal type. This may confuse a little bit, but if I had different types, but they had the same value, and I were comparing them, and that was something that was important, that's where I would want to use the triple equal. Okay. So examples of types, right, are numbers and strings. But there's also other types like undefined and null and objects. We'll get into those in a moment though. All right, here's an interesting one. Not equal. Anytime you see exclamation point equals, that means not equal. So you could say A is not equal to B, and that would evaluate to either true or false. So if A was 1 and B was 2, and I said A is not equal to B, that would evaluate to a true statement. Whereas if A was 1 and B was 1, and I said A is not equal to B, that would evaluate to a false statement. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. Then you have things that you've seen before in mathematics, like the greater than symbol, the less than symbol, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and you have the ternary operator. Ternary operators I'm not going to be getting into today, but basically a ternary operator is something that follows a conditional logic statement. So say I have A is equivalent to B, ternary operator. If it's true, then you're answering a question, then you're going to do the first option. Otherwise, you do the next option. We'll look at that. I don't even know if we're going to get into it, but that's just kind of a basis what that is. And then you have logical and logical or. If you're doing SQL right now, who's doing SQL again? Database? Anyone taking database class? Okay, so in your select statements, you have a where clause, right? And in your where clause, you'll say where A equals B and C equals D. The and statement is the logical part. We're saying where both of these are true, then evaluate. Okay? Or we could say where this or this are true. That's the logical or. So where A is true or B is true. Only one of the two has to be true to evaluate as a total true. Or you could have the complete logical not, where A is not, or A is this and not that, right? Those are logical. And then we get down to this idea of types and instances. Types and instances refer to how you would evaluate if the variable you have is a certain type. So if I declared a variable, say name, and I said var name equals Mike, I could use the operator of type of. I could say name space type of, and I could put string after it. And that would evaluate to true because it's evaluating that the variable is a type string, right? Or if I said var num equals 5, and then I said num type of number, it would evaluate to true. If it wasn't, it would evaluate to false. And the same thing with, type of will actually return the type it is, whereas instance would do the opposite. So if I said, I got those all backwards. So if I said name equals Mike, and then I said name type of, it would return a string. If I said var num equals 5 and then num type of, it would return number. Whereas if I wanted to know if the instance of a type was something, so if I said num instance of number, that would evaluate to true or false if it isn't a number. Okay. So think about this. Your JavaScript types. Strings. This is text or a series of characters. Sometimes even an array of characters. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, Alan or Martin or Justin, Layla, right? All of those pieces of text that make up your name here in Zoom, those are all strings, right? String is just a programmer's way to talk about it being text. It's not meaning that you're going to get a piece of string and tie something up with it. String just means text, okay? Numbers, in JavaScript, there's only one type of number. So you don't have Boolean, you don't have duals and floats and doubles and floats and ints and longs. In JavaScript, there's only just number. So number can be decimal, it could be whatever, be a regular number. The other type, JavaScript type, is a Boolean. So Booleans are true or false. Okay. And arrays. Arrays are written with square brackets, and then the items are separated by commas. All right, so I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I want to, let's see here. I have some people sending chat messages. What do we... Okay. All right, so let me pull up Adam real quick. And you guys just kind of follow along with me for a moment. And we're going to have a new file. Let's see, let's not do it that way. Let's go in and add a project folder. See, last week I had a JavaScript sample. That'd be a good project folder to open. So we'll open up our project folder for JavaScript, and we have this sample index HTML. So I'm going to open that up in Chrome. Okay. If you don't have these files, these are the lecture files from Tuesday. So just create a new project, and what we'll do is I'm going to take out this function and take out that, save it, and refresh. All right. Okay. I'm getting a message that my internet connection's a little slow. Am I stuttering on the video? Everything okay? Okay, give me a second. It looks like I'm still on my VPN from work. Let me disconnect. If I lose you all in Zoom, I'll be right back in, okay? Give me 1 second. Okay, so what I want to do, let's just work through a few samples here. And let's talk about some different JavaScript types, okay? So I'm going to drag this over just a little bit more center to the page. So if I declare a variable, I'll say var, take that off of there. And remember, var is the keyword for declaring a variable. I want to encourage you all again, please make sure you're opening Atom and following along. In my code set here, I have a script tag. This is inside of a single bit of HTML. Okay, so here in my var, I have a keyword var that I wrote, and I'm going to say name. Yeah, let's just say name equals double quotes, and just type in your name. Okay. Now, if you save that, you basically have a single statement in JavaScript that's declared, took up a piece of space in memory. So what I want to do, though, is I want to play around with this a little bit, and let's say name equals name plus space, and I'm going to come over here and say plus again and do another quotes, and I'm going to say Rogers, and you guys can put in your last name. Now, with this code in place, what I want you to do is go over to your Chrome browser where you have your index.html at, and you can press, if you're on a Mac, it would be function F12, or you can right click, go to inspect. But this is going to bring up the console, and we have, because this page already has the variable name on it, we can just type name and hit enter. And in the console, it's going to display the value that what I typed. Do y'all see that? So console, keep in mind, I covered this in Tuesday's video. Console is a way for you to express the JavaScript in a different way inside the browser to kind of work with it. So you could literally do something like this. You could say name plus equals, and I'm going to say junior, and hit enter. And you see what it did. It's now concatenated my name and added that extra piece in there. We talked about this being a string, right? So I could say name type of, hit enter. Oh, well, how about this? Type of name, hit enter. There we go. And you can see that the type of operator, before the variable, it tells you what type it is. Okay? Are you all able to get the same results that I'm doing so far? Okay. In JavaScript, string is not a keyword type that's available. Now, in Java, it is, but not JavaScript. I think with there's a strongly typed, it's a JavaScript def language, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's used with Angular quite a bit. You can create these type files and specify things like that there, but in native JavaScript, you can't do that. You're only limited to a subset of types. All right, so let's look at the other one. The other idea, the other way of evaluating the name was to say name instance of, and I'm going to say in quotes, string. If it enter, it's uncaught. Why is that? Name instance of. Oh, well, let's see here. String instance of name. Or shucky darn. Am I done doing this right? What was my well, I'll come back to you on that one. I don't think I've got the syntax right, but as you can see here, what we did, let's clear this out. CLS, where is it? Here it is, clear console. So as you can see though, name, if I hit enter, it still kept the state because I've changed it, right? Even though I've cleared the console. So other things that you can do, if you remember, we can say name plus a number, hit enter. Now I've concatenated a number to it, right? All right. Let's do some other interesting things. Let's do var 6 equal, oops, Identifier can't start with a number. Var num equals 6 plus 8. See my semicolon at the end? I hit enter. Really? And there you go. So I've declared the variable in memory in the console, right? And so now I have num as a variable. I could say num plus equal num. And what do you think that's going to it's going to process as? Num plus equal num. Yep, 28. Other things you can do, if you think about the, let's see, what is it? My mind's gone blank. Let's see, we'll do another num, because I'm going to overwrite it. Now that I've done that, num is overwritten. And if I hit enter, num is undefined. If I hit num again, well, you're supposed to be overwritten. Let's say num equals undefined. There we go. Yeah, now num is undefined. I could say var my num, hit enter, and if I say my num, it's undefined. I can now overwrite my num with that num, and it's still undefined because num was undefined. But I can say my num plus equals name. Think about what's going to happen there. It's appended, literally undefined, to the name Mike Rogers, right? All right, so these are some basic examples of what you can do here with these. Let's go ahead and go back to our index page over here, and we're going to change some of this up, and we're going to declare a new variable inside of our Atom text editor, and I'm going to say var is hot. And I'm going to say false. Okay. I'm going to come over here, refresh my browser. Console is going to be empty now. In fact, even name, if I type it, it's, well, you're supposed to be, did I not save? That's bizarre. It's supposed to clear out the memory. I don't know why it's doing that, but all right. So now if I type in is hot, you can already tell, you already see that it's already picked up the value of it, and it tells you is hot is false. But I could also say is hot is true to reassign it. So now is hot is true. All right? So that's your Boolean type. Your Boolean. All right, let's do a different one. Let's talk about arrays. Arrays. So with an array is a collection of values stored in one variable. And the typical syntax for creating array is something like this. We'll say var cars, because I'm going to create an array of cars. I use a square bracket, and that by itself is an empty array. So in my car arrays, I'll have a Ford, and I'll have a Dodge, and I'll have a, y'all give me a car name that you like. Lamb, is it OR? Lamborghini? G8? There, like that? All right. So now we have a set of cars called a Lamborghini, right? I mean, a set of an array of cars holding three cars in it. And if I come over here and I type cars, and I've refreshed it, did I refresh? No, I did not. Cars, it's already pulling back what those cars are, right? All right. An array is a easy way to grab up a set of places that are all going to hold the same type of data. Okay. So in this instance, I have a car, but if I was to try to access that car, I could do something like this. And you can see right away that when I do this, the console is already telling me what it's going to be. The car at position 0 is Ford. The car at position 1 is Dodge. And the car at position 3 is undefined. I'm playing with you guys here, trying to mess with your head. It's actually position 2, right? But I'm also pointing out something. Notice that the position of these, let me lay this out for you in comments so you can see it. This is 0. This is 1. This is 2. Arrays are done through an indexing mechanism that starts at position 0 to index something. So anytime I want to access something at a particular position, it has to exist. If I try to access something that doesn't exist in that array, it returns undefined. In Java, the Java programming language, it's a null, but in JavaScript, it's undefined. Right? Okay, so that is an array. And you can also do things kind of interesting. I can say cars 3 equals, and I'm going to assign Toyota to cars 3. So now if I type cars, you can see that my array now has 4 items. Do you guys see that? And very similarly, I can overwrite an item in there. Say I don't like Toyota. I can overwrite the position of that array by saying let's say Honda. So if I pull up cars again, now I have that position overwritten. So this is just a simple way of storing data. This is called an array. Arrays are very powerful. You can do a lot of cool things with arrays. You can iterate through an array. As you can see, they're position oriented. So you could, as long as you have an index identifier, you can iterate through that array and grab data and present it. Another type of data that we have is called the object. Okay? Objects. Now, objects are kind of like arrays, but the syntax for creating them is a little different. An object will contain a key value pair. They're kind of like entities. Or a type object, right? They allow you to create a variable that contains a specified set of attributes. So I'm going to say var person equals curly brackets. This is different. This is not an array. It's like an array, but it's different. If you're programming in Java, an object would be kind of similar to a map. Okay, so I'm going to say first name colon, and I need to specify in a string, comma, last name colon, and I would specify again some other value. Objects don't all have to be the same data type though. I could have age colon 16. You guys are like, nuh-uh, right? All right, so I'm specifying different values. Okay. Let's see, hobby. Now this is the fun thing about these data types. I could put now in an array object. So I want you to think about that. I could have an object that contains an array. So let's say hobbies are fishing, woodworking, bicycling, right? All right, so that is an object. Now let's go over here and refresh it. Refresh our code. Clear that out there for a second. Clear out. Did I not? Oh, there we go. So if I type person and hit enter, it kind of gives me this, it gives me an object. The person object now contains this key value pair, and I can click it down like this, and I can see all of the details of that key value pair. I can see the age, first name, last name, hobbies. This is also known as JavaScript object notation. Okay, JavaScript object notation. All right, so this is your object. Now, if I wanted to access something in my person object, well, how would I do that? I could do person colon age and hit enter, and it gives me the value. I could say person colon hobbies, and it gives me the value of that hobby, right? Or let's do something interesting here. Let's say person quote cars equals cars. What do you think just happened? Let's inspect the person object now. And you can see what I did. I just added another key value pair right to that object. You see that? So if we click on it and inspect it, we see age, we see cars now have been added. You see the name, last name, hobbies, right? All of these things have been added to the object. So objects are very powerful data mechanisms. In fact, in JavaScript, a lot of times what we see happen is the backend servers will produce data that's converted to an object. And then on the page, the code is using the object, that data object, to populate the values on the page. It's a very powerful way of changing and representing data, right? Okay, so these are some different JavaScript types. Let's see here. We've talked about the JavaScript type of operator. We have the Let's pull this back over for a second. I want y'all to look at some of this real quick before we go any further. We have the type of operator. So these are primitive types. The type of operator will return a string, a number, a Boolean, or undefined. It'll also return complex data types like function and object. So think about the code that we have right here. If I say type of person, it returns an object. That's the type because it's a complex data type, right? All right, let's go back to our lecture again here. Okay, so let's talk about functions. Functions are really the bread and butter of JavaScript development. Everything really resides in functions. A JavaScript function, it's a code block. And so you can see an example here. We have multiply numbers x and y, and we tell it to return the multiplication of those numbers, right? Think about doing that in code for a moment. So we come over here and we type function. Go ahead and do this with me, okay? Multiply numbers. It's going to take a parameter and a second parameter. And then we're going to return the calculation. I'm going to wrap this in a parenthesis because I want it to be very clear what's happening here. So we're going to say x times y. I'll save it. I'll come back over here and refresh my screen, and we'll call our function. We'll say multiply numbers, and I'm going to pass in my number. Let's pass in a really crazy number like that number. And you hit enter, and there's your number. It does the calculation for you, right? So functions are a very easy way to encapsulate types of logic and to do things that you want done, right? All right, let's go ahead and look back at our lecture one more time. We're going to switch over here to the homework assignment in a second. So think about the syntax for the function. The functions are defined by the keyword function. That's the keyword, function. Then they're followed by a valid identifier. The same rules that apply to creating variables, they apply to function identifiers. They have to either start with a letter, an underscore, or a $sign, okay? And then after the identifier, you have a parenthesis. My lecture notes are missing this part. You need the parenthesis, which is the constructor part of the function. And then that's followed by curly brackets. Now, functions can contain parameters, like we just showed you. And parameters are the pieces of data that are going to be used and passed in to the function. They're special variables. Parameters, you can have as many as you want as long as they're comma delimited, comma separated. Okay, so what can invoke a function? So function calls are, when they're called, they're invoked. You need to learn this word because in programming, invoking is a very common word to talk about how a function is called. To invoke means to call. So the following things can invoke a function. Events. We can have mouse clicks, key ups, hover overs, on blur. The other thing that can call a function is another function. Another function can call a function. Or we can set them to be automatically invoked when a page loads. A function will kick off and go do something. Okay, those are the three ways that functions are called. So functions typically return something. So I demonstrated a moment ago the idea of a calculator, right? A simple calculator. We can say var x equals my calculation. And we're assigning the value of the function to the variable. This piece of text here is calling, it's invoking this function down here. And it invokes it with those two parameters. So 4 corresponds to A and 3 corresponds to B. It is the order of entry into the parenthesis. All right, any questions here so far? Anything that's been kind of plaguing you? Okay. So let's talk about real quick. We're going to move into some other things like strings. Strings in themselves, they contain methods and properties. And there are 3 types of properties that all strings have. There's a constructor, there's a length, and there's a prototype. Okay, those are across all types of types. So numbers, methods, objects, they all have those. With a string, you can get the length. So for example, in this method, or this variable here, I have a property called string. Now keep in mind that a property is an accessible value field on the string variable. So there are different properties that you can access. These are accessible. So I have a string literal here. I could say, in quotes, my string, close quotes, dot length. And it will take the property of this and pass the length over here, left assign. I can also do things like I can locate things. So for example, I have a variable called my string. It equals, my string is fine, all in quotes. Now, once I have that, I can say my string dot index of fine. And what that'll do, index of returns the position, the number of characters in where the word fine is located. So index of returns the position of the first occurrence. And strings, all just like arrays, position of or index of always begins at 0. So the first element of a string, for example, this, if we're looking at my string, the M in my string is at position 0. Y would be at position 1. The space at position 2, right? It's something you have to kind of wrap your head around it if this is the first time you've done this. All right, what I want you to W3 School's site, I will post this in the chat. And I want you just to go there real quick. Go there with me real quick. This is the JavaScript reference for the string. These are all available. So you have things like character at, char code at, concat, constructor, ends with, includes, index, last index, length, on and on and on it goes. There's all of these methods. Some of my favorites to use are substring, where you give it 2 characters, a starting position and an ending, and it'll grab from that string a set of characters. Or you can say 2 uppercase. It'll make everything in that string uppercase, or 2 lowercase. These are very valuable for string manipulation. Or you can say trim, and trim takes all the white space in a string and takes it all out. Okay, that's in this this site. Please take the time to to look at those. All right, we also have JavaScript number functions. So you can take a number and say toString. It's available in any number, and it will convert that number to a string, or to exponential, or to fixed. There's a lot more. And again, this is all located there on that site. I'm going to load this up for you and copy the link. W3 Schools is a great resource. Whether something is a number or not, you can parse text, parse floats, the largest number that you can put in JavaScript, and the smallest number possible for JavaScript. You may think, what do you mean there's a limit? Yeah, there's a limit. You can't just write out a string of numbers and make it ginormous and the program still operate. They actually have a set length. And if we actually do that, we could grab this real quick and come over here and just type in max value. Let's see. I think it's like that. How do we do that? There it is. Do it like this. So X, there is the max number. And of course you can see that's the exponent at the end. So it's 1.79 blah, 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 e to the power of 308. That's the largest number you can put in, which is it's pretty big number. Okay, let's go back to our lecture real quick. We've talked about JavaScript, arrays. And that's it. Okay. What I want you to do, go ahead and open up in the course. Where are you at? I guess I closed it. Go ahead and open up in your course room. And we're going to go to today's assignment. Okay, when you get there for this week, some of today's assignment is going to depend on you have gone through the lecture from Tuesday. Again, you all need to make sure that you listen to that lecture and go through it. The homework that you're doing this week, remember that you have your midterm that's this week, okay? Your midterm is due, when is it due? By November 2nd. So if we're looking at our calendar, November 2nd is Monday next week. I'm giving you one extra day for your midterm. Make sure that you do the midterm part 1 and part 2 of the midterm. Part 2 is the quiz. Part 1 is the HTML CSS assignment that you have to do. Okay? Again, your midterm is due by Tuesday, Monday next week. You have your forum this week. Make sure that you take a look at the forum. All right, so here is your homework assignment. I have included a link to this. If you go ahead and open up that link, it's going to be a simple Word doc. And what I want to do is we have 30 minutes. I want you guys to open up the document and start working on it now. And you don't have it? Okay, let me go back to that site again. Oh, there you go. It should be now. Refresh your page. Do you guys see it? Okay. So what I want you to do is open up that Word doc, and the instructions are going to require you to create the folder. You're going to have to create the HTML, and you're going to have to create the JavaScript. Now, we've walked through the tools for this so many times with Adam that 90% of this is going to be extremely easy. But I want to talk through it with you, okay? You're going to create a folder called Homework, and this should say week 13, guys. Homework week 13 dash your name. Okay? Once you create the folder, inside the folder, I want you to create an index HTML, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording though for right now, and because I want to see you guys kind of work through this, and I don't want the video to be too long.